It's time for AggroChat, the official podcast of the Tales of the Aggronaut blog and stalwart gaming community, where we talk about stuff and things, and the stuff about the things, and sometimes gaming. I'm Belghast, and let's start the show. Hey folks, it's that time again. Time for another episode of AggroChat. This is episode 463. Tonight I'm joined by Ashgar.
We're Old Lang Syne.
Grace.
Hi.
Kodra.
What's a Joe?
Tam.
Happy New Year, finally.
And Thalen.
Hi there.
What kind of a Joe, Kodra?
It, I believe, translates roughly to my dear. It's like in the first line of Old Lang Syne.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
Is it? That's news to me.
Some people just translate it directly into my dear.
That's fair. That's usually what I hear.
But like, the poem is deeply Scottish. Old Lang Syne is a Scottish phrase. Joe, yeah.
The most melancholy song ever to open a new year.
I highly recommend if you're up for some sadness and some melancholy, listening to John Green's review of it.
Yeah, I listened to it after you talking about it the other day, and I had it in the background, and it was interesting. Rogue Trader, I assume this is the new CRPG?
Yes.
Owlcat's been busy.
Yeah. Owlcat has decided that it wants to try to keep pace with Larian, and has done a Warhammer 40k CRPG. And so, like, kind of a bold move to release your IP heavy CRPG in the same year that Baldur's Gate 3 releases, but it's got a very similar story, like development story, in the sense that it's been in early access for a while and not quite as long, but has had a lot of iteration and so forth. I kind of went into it pretty skeptical because 40k is sort of a dark universe.
I feel like the only sensible possible option there is for 40k and not being completely grim is, in fact, from the perspective of a rogue trader.
Yeah.
Yes,
and that's like,
that is entirely true.
Yeah, like, and it makes sense. I mean, it's also the premise behind the 40k like tabletop RPG, which is what the game is based off of.
Yeah, I mean, Rogue
The
Trader,
older one, anyway.
Rogue Trader is like kind of where 40k started, and it's allowed to be more tongue-in-cheek and absurd with it.
There is a newer 40k RPG that is also somewhat extremely tongue-in-cheek and absurd with it, but it's because it's set in the part of the galaxy that the Empire doesn't have access to.
Yeah.
Aha.
Well, and it's one of those things where, like, I feel like if you're going to do a 40k game where you're trying to lean on the narrative at all, you basically have two options. You go absolutely absurd with it and make it clear that it's just black humor. And to some extent, if you're doing that, you really need to be like, you need to cross over into wacky in a way that, frankly, a lot of 40k fans aren't going to like. Or you can.
I feel like there's an opportunity.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I feel like there's an opportunity to try and figure out how to thread the Fallout needle with this, but it's hard.
Yeah, like you could do 40k as funny in the same way that Fallout does funny.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's hard. Or you can do what Owlcat did, and this game reminds me of nothing so much as Tyranny.
Okay, that's a good, option.
Because the thing that Tyranny did was it expected you to be an awful, awful person baseline.
For anyone unfamiliar with this game, the premise of Tyranny is that you start the game working for the big bad who has won.
Yep. Like it is a setting controlled by the big evil, and you're part of the big evil's machine.
Yeah.
Pretty important part of it, in fact.
And it's super compelling because the thing that it does is it really exposes that being the good guy is such a default state in so many RPGs, like especially narrative heavy ones, that it's like it almost, I mean, the joke is do you want to do something reasonably decent for another person? You want to kick a baby for no reason? Like,
Yeah.
Hardly feels like a choice. Whereas here it's like, whereas in Tyranny, you doing decent things for people is usually directly against what you know the intent of the big bad is. And Rogue Trader is super similar. Like you can not only choose to do right by people who aren't expecting you to, but it actually does a good job of putting you into situations where, like, hey, are you doing, if you bomb this city, if you bomb this planet, is that actually a merciful choice? Like, it's got really dark decisions that are interesting because of the way it sets things up. And on top of that, you can be a decent person. And like that's frequently inconvenient for you, but it makes it all the sweeter. It also like touches on wacky just enough. Like, you know, they talk about you're a rogue trader and you have a writ of trade, and it's this super important document, you know, signed by the emperor that basically lets you do whatever. And you actually see this thing, and it's like comically enormous. It's a scroll that's like house sized. It's so silly, but like, but everybody takes it really seriously. And compounding that, you interact with people. You interact with like a bizarre cast of people who are only working together because they work for you. And like some of them hate each other, and some of them are like, you're real lucky you have that giant piece of paper because I have the authority to do awful things to you if you didn't.
I do know I've seen a couple of reviews where people are basically complaining about how they feel unrewarded for making all of the good person decisions.
I mean, this is the 40k universe. That's entirely appropriate. Being good in the 40k universe is its own reward because you ain't getting anything else for that.
Yeah. I mean, and one of the things that I find really interesting about it is that, like, if you're good, it's because you want to do right by some people, and they're pretty thankful. They're usually very surprised, but you're not really getting materially rewarded. But also, it's a game where material rewards are so abstract because you're operating at like nation state levels of wealth. Like there's no currency in the game. Like you don't have gold. You just have like trade influence, and that affects what you can just have.
Mm-hmm.
You know, do you have enough trade influence, and does whoever sells the thing like you enough? Yeah, sure, you can have that thing as part of the like regular trade that you're doing with us. But yeah, I find it really compelling. I never saw any of this, but it had some big problems with like later act bugs, which I'm fairly sure have been fixed by this point.
What type of character are you playing?
I'm playing. So I started by deciding I was not going to take this game seriously, and I found a mod that let me use a 40k-ified version of Harry from Disco Elysium as your character portrait. Because I was like, yeah, I mean, this is going to be comically black humor. This is going to be jokes. I'm going to be very silly about it. And then I got into it and was like, oh no, I actually want to take this seriously because it rewards me for taking it seriously narratively, in a way that doesn't just feel like oppressively bleak. And so I'm playing an officer because I've hung around with Kodra long enough to know that breaking action economy is very strong. Your options are, it's weird. Your background is like one half of your class, and that can be things like, you know, trooper or spaceborne or like crime lord, or like psyker, and those offer you a number of advancement opportunities. And then there's like your actual class, which is slightly different, And the classes are, I think it's warrior, who's like a melee character, or maybe just a generic, like tanky fighter character. Operative, that's like identifies weaknesses in targets and debuffs them. Officer, which gives orders to people, which basically gives them bonus actions and so on. And something that I can never remember. And then there's, various layers of this. It's soldier is the last one, which is the shooty person. But each one is actually pretty compelling. I just like it feels like it makes sense to be an officer in the context that the game provides.
Mm-hmm.
There's a variety of fun characters. They're all playing against type just a little bit. One of my favorites, to my great surprise, is the Sister of Battle, who joins you relatively early on, who is like the most fanatical cleric you've ever seen, while also carrying a giant rifle, and who is all in on helping the needy. Sometimes to the point of like skirting with heresy. And I'm into it. Like,
are you into heresy? Are you a heretic?
No, I'm an iconoclast. Your choices let you you can be dogmatic, which is like towing the line of the Imperium. You can be a heretic, which is I am totally fallen to chaos. I think there's a third one that I can't remember. And there's iconoclast, which is I care about people, even when that's a terrible idea.
That sounds like heresy with extra steps.
Yes.
That's what a lot of people seem to think, which is very funny. The Inquisitor in my party is not happy about that whole thing. But whatever, I've got a piece of paper that says he can F off. And in fact, I can tell him this repeatedly. In fact, they have made a character that Bell would hate immediately, except for one thing.
What?
They have made the character, and you know the character I'm talking about. The character who's like part of the establishment, doesn't really trust you. That guy.
Is this character a Space Marine?
No, he's just he's your warrior. He's your like starting warrior. He's not a Space Marine. He's the seneschal for your ship. As the seneschal, one of his duties is to be sure that you are properly announced anywhere you go.
Oh God.
It is so funny to be like, you can it's not a button I push very often, but you can be like, hey buddy, can you announce me? And he's all in on it. He's like, he'll like rattle off like 5 or 6 different titles for you and shout at people that he doesn't feel are showing the rogue trader the proper level of respect. But you can also order him to tell people things on your behalf. So when the Inquisitor was like, hey, that's not okay. This choice you're making about these people is not okay. I can be like, hey, Abelard, can you tell him I have a piece of paper that says it is okay, in fact?
Wow.
And he does. It's really funny.
You could just delegate that down.
Yeah.
I do feel like my experience with 40K is Inquisitors are basically all hypocrites because they're all dabbling in the heresy.
Yes. Well,
Details.
and there's
It's come up a lot
of that going on. I've already seen enough that I'm like, I could play through this in a very different way, couldn't I? Do I want to? I'm not sure, but I could.
Now, the most important question: Are there any Jokero in this game?
I have not seen one yet, but I haven't gotten very far.
All right, holding out hope. Ideally, as a recruitable party member.
There's definitely references to them. Like, I got a digital weapon.
All right.
And and it talks about like, yeah, this is how this was made. But yeah, I haven't actually seen one. I have not gotten all of the party members either. Like, I know this because the box art has a character that I don't have yet. I don't know what a Space Wolf character is going to be doing in my party, or an Eldar for that matter. But
those both sound hilarious.
I mean,
Eating each other?
Oh yeah, no, the absolute mess that is my bridge already before I have a Space Wolf or Dark Eldar character is definitely a whole time.
I mean, that also sounds like tyranny.
Right. The comparison really feels apt. Yeah, I'm enjoying it a lot more than I thought I was going to. Also, it's like fully turn-based and works pretty well.
Yeah, I saw a lot of the system stuff they were doing before the game even launched.
They do a good job of scaling the kinds of things you fight, because you're like, whatever, it's a bunch of, cultist rabble. It's like, yeah, you fight like 20 of them in a combat, and it's sort of whatever. And then at one point you fight one Chaos Space Marine.
Oh my.
And it's a problem.
Yeah, that would be.
Granblue Fantasy Relink. Is this the fighting game?
This is not the fighting game. The fighting game is Granblue Fantasy Versus. And this has been a problem for me getting things straight, because to back up, the fighting game came out in early 2020 and was moderately successful, but never picked up a tournament scene because it had bad online and it was early 2020. They had a new revision come out this year called Granblue Fantasy Versus Rising, which I constantly confuse with this game, Final Granblue Fantasy Relink. This is the action RPG, the one that has been in development since 2017.
Aha.
Really? That's finally out?
It's out on February 1st. It's got a demo on PlayStation platforms now, although it is also releasing on PC. It doesn't have a demo on PC. This has been a long development, let's say.
Because this was announced before Genshin, I think. Because I remember, if I remember correctly, when I first saw Genshin, I thought it was this.
I could believe that, because this was announced a long time ago. And I didn't hear about Genshin until like 2019, 2020, something like that.
Yeah.
This one
Curious how this one is.
Seems to be a sort of mission-based action combat party-based RPG.
Okay.
A lot of the Monster Hunter crowd seems to be taking notice of this one for some reason, even though they're really not the same type of game in any way. Just another action combat game. But I got a chance to play this one at PAX West this past year, and I enjoyed the demo there. So I've been really looking forward to the actual release and the demo, although I have not gotten a chance to play the demo yet. It just came out yesterday. But one of the things that intrigues me about this is that Granblue Fantasy is a large property, let's say. It's got a million different characters, as you might expect from a gacha game. And it's been running for a very, very long time. So it's got a lot of story as well. So part of what just interests me with this is the option to see some of the story, other than what's in the anime, in a context that isn't a decade-old browser game.
Right. That's my problem with Granblue Fantasy, is it is just too big. It is too much to try and comprehend. Like, it looks interesting, but it's just a lot. And I was hoping this would be a more approachable version.
Yeah. That's part of why I'm interested in it.
Yeah, I'm here for this. Like, what I've seen of Granblue Fantasy, it seems like a thing I would be really into. It's certainly pressing a bunch of the right buttons.
I said decade old, and that's actually correct. It came out 10 years ago in March.
I don't know much about Granblue Fantasy other than that Jita is a character in another game that I play. And I like Jita a lot, so.
That's the female avatar character.
Yeah.
In the main game you have you choose between a male and a female avatar, and they don't name either one of these in the game, but in other settings, Gran is the male and Jita is the female. They both became separate characters, the Ryu and Ken, as it were, of the fighting game.
Makes sense.
So yeah, looking forward to this. I'm going to try the demo at some point this weekend, and we'll see how that goes.
Is this one of your more classic, please input like quarter circle punch?
I am not talking about the fighting game.
Oh, okay.
Although the fighting game has interesting mechanics sure, that's probably worth the point. So the fighting game is interesting in that they wanted it to be more approachable for beginners. So they have traditional fighting game inputs for most things, but also you can just press a button and do the move with a short cooldown.
Neat.
And I know there are some moves that get the cooldown regardless of how you do them because they're powerful enough or whatever else. But it's a really interesting system that don't know that much about total because I have not looked very much at the fighting game. Got one of the best grapplers of all time, though. Almost up there with the chef from Chaos Code.
Weird news that I never thought we would be talking about on this show. City of Heroes is back, sort of.
I mean, we've had a rogue server for a couple of years now.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
Now it's not a rogue server anymore. It's an official server, set of servers.
We have actually talked about Homecoming on this very show.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. But like, I think we brought it up during the Star Wars Galaxy discussions because, like, that was, to me, those were the two that were doing a unofficial official server really well.
Yeah, like the servers were fully functional and being supported, and the actual like holders of the rights to these properties didn't seem to be, in any hurry to give them any flack. So, they were doing pretty good in a gray area. And the Star Wars Galaxies server, that's still over in a gray area, but the Homecoming servers, those aren't in a gray area anymore. Like they've got an official like license from NCSoft to run those games, and they're still completely free to play, like supported by donations. So I did finally actually recreate my old original character on one of those servers and played a little bit. It is City of Heroes.
If I were to go into this, having never played City of Heroes, is this going to be a rough start?
Yes, it's an old game.
Okay.
It's a very old game.
It is a pre-EverQuest MMO.
Yes.
It's
not
pre-EverQuest.
WoW. Pre-WoW. It's pre-WoW.
Okay.
Sorry, pre-WoW, yeah.
Yeah,
this was
pre-WoW.
the game that I was playing when I got in WoW beta and stopped playing this game.
Same. Like, yeah, this and Star Wars Galaxies were what I was playing at this time. But it'll have a bit of a learning curve. It also movement still feels really good.
I was actually going to ask, does super movement feel good? Because that's frankly like what I am saddest about not getting to see champions carry through.
Super movement feels great.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
I loved in champions having super jump.
Leaping is a lot of fun.
There are a lot of very cool things that you can do in City of. Like yes, you can be a speedster, that's totally a thing. But you could also be a mastermind. Like, do you want to just be the dude in a suit who has an army of ninjas? Like, you can be that person.
Yeah.
That's a little more City of Villains, but...
Although, I assume the Homecoming servers have, like, all the going rogue and everything on them, so you can start a character on one side and switch to the other.
I would assume you have the wild bases that you could build.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, honestly, probably the hardest part about like starting as a new player on these servers is they already have all of the additional stuff, that got added in over the years. So there's a lot more options creating a character than there originally were. I mean, I think it's pretty good about telling you which options, work better for solo and not, and so forth.
I mean, this is going to sound funny, but had City of Heroes not existed, Thalen, Tam, Kodra, and I probably never would have met.
Yep.
Because like Late Night Raiders probably wouldn't have happened if, this hadn't been a game that like coalesced into a bunch of people beforehand.
Yeah.
And then everyone went to WoW afterwards. Like, it was a big game. Like it had really cool things. I loved the costumes that you could have per character, like so that you could, have matching costumes if you wanted to group with your friends, and like, and then you could have like, casual outfits too.
I mean, it had one of the best character designers at the time, like by far.
It's still got one of the best character designers.
Like, there's a lot of control over individual parts of your costume, and you can, link colors and unlink individual pieces so that they can have different colors from the rest of your costume. Control over your body type and so forth. It's honestly really impressive.
That was one of the things I really liked about Champions.
Yeah, like I would say that champions hit about 75 to 80% of what City of was doing.
And that was still way better than basically every other MMO I'd seen to that point.
Yeah.
And most of the ones I've played since.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely.
I mean, in another world without WoW existing, City Heroes would have been the breakout MMO that really moved the genre forward because it was doing that. It just didn't go as far forward as WoW did.
Yeah, if the MCU, if it had managed to hold on until the MCU happened, it is what everybody would be playing.
Well, and it had so many concepts that were revolutionary for the time. Like, it was the first game I ever played with mentoring, where you could lower your level to another player and then run content with them at their level. But it also had bolstering, which was you could take a low level character and drag them up to your level and do your content with them.
Sidekicking.
Yes.
Yep.
Like they wanted you to be able to play with your friends and gave you ways to make this happen.
And they had really huge group sizes from what I remember. Like it was like 8 or something, maybe?
For just
There were really big group sizes, but it also had content that either scaled or didn't care if you had the specific group size.
Well, it scaled really well. Like
all of the
number
all of
of
the instance
spawns,
content,
rarity of spawns. So like there were a bunch of vectors that would change. So like if you brought someone in, instead of a pack of 2 people, it might be a pack of 3 people. Or instead of, 2 blue cons and a white con, it might be 2 white cons and an orange con.
Yeah. Yeah, because there was both the level of the enemy and then also its like class. Like whether it was just like a mook or, an officer or an actual full-on villain and so forth.
Well, and it's the first game I can really remember NPCs doing group tactics against me.
Yeah.
Because like there were, you would fight a faction and then that faction had different kinds of foot soldiers, but like fighting whatever the mafia were called in that game felt different than fighting, the zombie people. Like they had totally different movesets and they relied on totally different tricks.
Yeah. Well, and even within particular factions, as you got higher level and were fighting more powerful members of that faction, like tactics would change because you're not fighting just random cultists now. You're fighting the things that the cultists serve.
Right. And it was really cool, especially because you would like encounter a faction early on and they weren't too bad. And then you encounter them a couple levels later in a different zone. Oh no, they got their stuff together now. And I also remember the zones having a sense of place. Like King's Row felt like King's Row.
Yeah. Like, the city was remarkably well designed.
And the other thing that just like impressed me at the time was almost every door you passed could be a gateway into a mission, it felt like. Because you were constantly getting sent to random doors that would open up a new instance. Damn, now I'm nostalgic about this game.
It's, like, I kind of think we need to pick a server and all,
I looked it up. When we talked about this, it was early 2020. And along with the Star Wars Galaxies things.
Like, I'd love to get a group together and, go kill skulls.
I was a magical katana region scrapper. That was my character.
It was a gravity radiation controller. Lots of launching enemies into the air.
Mostly the katana region thing was so that I could be invulnerable if I wanted to. Guess I'll now have to look up how you actually get connected to this thing.
It is remarkably straightforward.
Okay. I mean, as someone who figured out how to connect to a Chinese Monster Hunter Online server, I'm probably okay.
Yeah, you're not going to have any trouble.
I was going to say, it's probably easier than connecting to PSO2 was back in the day.
Probably so.
God.
So we've talked about Last Epoch a few times, but this week they announced some further details on their trade system and the upcoming official release in February of the 1.0 version of the game.
I am so hyped.
Me too. I'm really interested in this trade system. I think it sounds very cool, and there's a few details I'd like to get, but like honestly, it's solving a lot of the problems that I could see having. Like maybe I'll make a trade league character, or maybe I'll just be like, hey, I'm gonna play with all of my friends, and we're just gonna have a small guild that's all in the circle of fortune. So the trick here is there's basically two factions that you can join. You can join the Bazaar, which allows for items you gather to be traded on at the Bazaar.
Merchants Guild. For
it's the
people who
Merchants
are
Guild,
not
yeah.
me.
And you level up reputation with the Merchants Guild, and this allows you to make different types of trades, and you level up by making trades, and there is an in-game auction house trading system for you to do this. This is the traditional, hey, I want to have trade as part of my gameplay. This is sort of like, I definitely like this in Path of Exile. I know it's not for everyone, but part of the challenge with Path of Exile is if you're not trading, it's not like you're getting any sort of advantage on gear, and the game is geared towards people trading. So trading is just hard.
Yes. Facts.
We made a league of it. Like we have successfully played through a league and gotten some functional characters as a result.
It is true.
But like all of our characters are a few pegs lower than where they would have been in a trade economy.
It's 100% true.
Speak for yourselves.
That said, the other option is Circle of Fortune, where you get basically prophecies that you fulfill, and then you get special items from those prophecies. So you're like, one of the first things you get is a 35% chance for the amount of loot a monster to drop being doubled. Like that's just step one of this thing. So already that's a pretty significant uptick in the amount of gear you're gonna see. But also there's going to be items that drop for you that are like pegged to your amount of Circle of Fortune. And you can trade with other people in your party as long as they're all of the same reputation as you.
Actually, you can trade with people in your party, and they can use the item if they're at the same level of reputation.
Correct. That's true. They just can't use the item if they aren't at the same level of reputation. Which I thought was going to be neat, and it was going to encourage me to play with more people, but ultimately I was like, there's still some flaws with this. And then they solved the flaw I saw, which is like, I want to play in a group with my friends, but I want to be able to solo, and still, like, if I see a cool drop, I don't want to be sad about it.
Yep.
If it's a drop for someone else. So now what they've added is the ability for you to generate resonances with people who you play with. And if you generate a resonance between you and another player, you can use that resonance to give them an item that you got while they weren't playing.
Yeah, because like this is the number one frustration that I've had with Diablo 3 for years is eventually you get to the point in a season where like, Grace needs this one thing to complete her build. I need this one thing to complete my build. But if we didn't happen to be on at the same time, then oops. Like the number of times that we have grouped up and 15 minutes before the thing the other needed dropped.
Yep. Yeah. Whatever the other person needs, that will drop for you as soon as they leave the group.
Yeah, like or log out for the night. Nope, no, I got 3 of them. So this is going to be really interesting to see how this shakes out, because like I think it's going to be a good system. Like I think this may be a new template for ARPG trade systems.
I think this is a really smart system. I like how many different play styles it is supporting.
I am super excited about it. I mean, obviously, I am most excited about the Circle of Fortune side, and some of the rank rewards are just completely bananas. But also, I do appreciate that the Merchants Guild has an in-game auction house, and I will probably make a character or two that are on that faction instead, because I don't actually have anything intrinsically against, a in-game economy. I just really dislike the execution in Path of Exile. But if I can anonymously exchange goods on an in-game auction house, then I'll probably mess around with that. But just I am most excited because my play style, I like seeing the excitement of getting that really great drop. And with the Circle of Fortune, the odds of getting that really great drop go way up.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really hoping that the prophecies are going to fill in the problem that I've traditionally had where there's a couple build-defining uniques that I can't get to drop, and maybe that'll be a little bit easier to target something like that.
Yeah, I'm hoping that too. Last Epoch has some pretty strong chase items that even for as much as I had played, I hadn't seen drop. And I agree. I hope that this system helps a little with that. And even if it doesn't directly through the prophecies, just all of the increased, item amount and chances for different rarities of items is gonna give at least some boost to your luck.
Now, does last Epoch have a trading system or crafting system, and is it anything like the crafting system in PoE?
Yes.
Let me tell you, it is a much more deterministic system.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a crafting system. It is much less nonsensical.
It has random components. It is much, much easier to directly put things you want on your gear, but it's determined on you getting drops that give you those things.
Okay.
Yep.
It is very interesting because I did watch. They've been doing a lot of interviews with the PoE2 game director and staff. And one of the statements which definitely resonated with me is Chaos Orbs and Scour Orbs are a huge problem in PoE in that they basically invalidate any stats that drop on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
That's not true in Last Epoch at all.
Which definitely makes it not fun seeing just big loot explosions in PoE, because it's just like, oh, that's a bunch of garbage on the ground. Whoops, guess I'm going to just leave it there. Oh, wait, this one says it's a max roll. Sure, I'll take it. Maybe I'll craft it.
So how it works in Last Epoch is that every item essentially has a certain amount of crafting potential, and every time you take an action on that item, you're removing from that number. And once you run out of that crafting potential, it's basically stuck whatever it is.
Oh, so it's like everything's a ROG epic or a ROG item.
It's kind of like ROG crafting, yeah.
Again,
the thing is,
much more deterministic.
what you're looking for usually is an item with a couple of stats that you really want and room to put the other stats that you want on it. But if you happen to find an item in the field that has one stat that you really care about, you can scrap it and get basically the shards of whatever that stat was to put it on a different item.
You get a chance of stealing the stats from other items. And there's also reasons why, like, depending on the rarity of the items that you have, there's, the legendary potential thing, which I guess lets you take an exalted item and mush it into a unique item and combine the stats. And so that I enjoy that, because then you have the chase of getting the unique you want, but you also have that chance to look for the exalted item that's going to boost the stats to be exactly what you want when you craft it.
And this sounds less miserable than throwing a bunch of Val orbs at uniques that you care about.
Oh God, yes.
So much less miserable.
It's like, I want +2 AoE gem, socketed AoE gems on my Cloak of Flames. LOL.
I mean,
have we
here
even
you need to
seen a
get
Cloak of Flames?
Oh, we've seen a couple.
Okay.
Here you need to get a Cloak of Flames 2-drop with legendary potential, which is sort of the hang up there.
Okay.
That's the part that, like, I hope individual items become more target farmable if you're a Circle of Fortune or something.
Well, if
Yeah.
you're Circle of Fortune, you're like, once you rank up, your uniques are twice as likely to have legendary potential.
Oh, interesting.
Nice.
Yeah, so like if it says legendary potential 1, that means when you do the merge, it's going to keep 1 stat from your item that you're merging into it. But it'll be 1 out of 4. Legendary potential is legendary potential 2 the highest you can get?
I don't actually
I'm
remember.
not sure. 2 is the highest I've ever seen, but I don't know if it's the highest.
Yeah,
that
same.
exists.
That's the highest I've ever seen. But yeah, like so you ultimately want like a item with as high of legendary potential as you can, so that you can have the greatest chance of getting the stat that you really cared about the most.
They also put out some really weird, unique items that don't have legendary potential, but just sort of level up and get random stats as you use them. Some of them are wild.
Yeah, they're either really good or kind of awful, but they're entertaining nonetheless.
Most of them are like the baseline item is pretty good, so you're using it anyway. So you just kind of hope you get one that has the stuff you want.
I feel like I'm going to have a whole bunch of new systems I'm going to have to learn, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, but they're way
But
less
there's in-game
chaotic.
documentation of almost all of those systems.
Oh, my
yeah, that
goodness.
too.
And you can also create loot filters in-game with a really good UI and also a seemingly unlimited number of bank stash tabs.
Who knows? You buy them with gold.
Keep spending money on them. They keep adding them to the list.
I haven't run out of the end of the list. I have no idea where it is, though.
Do we know if Falconer's going to be ready by Go Live?
We do, and it will.
That sounds like
We
fun.
didn't talk about it, but the Rune Master is one of the coolest things they've ever put in a game like this. The mage they added.
I haven't messed with it yet, but I really want to.
Based on the spells you cast, you like build up runes, and then you use a ability that I don't remember what they called it, but it basically spends your runes to make a spell. And you get a different spell based on what order and how many there are.
Yep. And you can have a truly outrageous number of combinations.
Yeah, honestly, at launch, I am going to have a hard time deciding what class I'm going to play because there are several that seem very appealing.
Unless they nerf it into the ground, I'm going to be playing a Primalist doing the shapeshifting summoner build.
I
I
would
came up
really
with.
like to have a squirrel hat.
I do want to try that, and I still haven't found the squirrel hat either.
That's all I want to do. I want to be a squirrel master.
I do really like my frozen plant druid.
Nothing in this game is screaming, I drop mines and blow them up, so I'm still lost. I'm still thinking Falconer.
Rogue has traps type,
Yeah,
but not the same as you want.
I mean, how do you feel about summoning zombies and blowing them up?
Less good, but I'm intrigued.
Yeah, there's a build where you basically, it requires specific uniques, but once the chain reaction starts, you just have an endless cavalcade of exploding zombies.
That sounds entertaining.
I also really want to try the swarm build thing that's like basically this game's version of Whirlwind.
But with a
Storm
bug.
Strike, yes.
With a giant bug.
Storm Strike is very good. The build I was playing last time I was playing this game was a frost-based dot build for Primalist that went between Swarmblade and Treant to keep both of those effects active. It was very good.
Nonsense. I mean, the Treant thing was basically, do you just never want to die?
Yeah.
And also summon angry
Also that.
flowers.
I switched over to that one after because I had been playing Necromancer Zoo and enjoying it, but I got tired of dying and stopped dying when I switched.
That's the problem. Like, I love the Necromancer in the game, but it is kind of squishy.
Yeah, this build would have been better if I could have gotten an Terra's Path at any point. But yeah, whatever.
I do feel like I have a different opinion about squishiness of characters than most.
You do. I don't play characters that squishy, generally speaking.
I mean, if I get to turn all of the enemies into just as squishy as I am, I'm pretty okay with it.
Yeah, I mean, like I feel like Kodra and I are on opposite ends of a scale.
I really am trying to figure out a character that is super tanky that I'm going to enjoy, but my thought of, I'll just use this Berserker was probably not the right solution.
That's not tank. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of champion options that are very tanky.
This is reasonable.
Berserker is tankier than most right side characters are going to end up, but, well, I guess until you take Aspect of Carnage.
I was about to say, I've taken Aspect of Carnage.
Never mind then.
Now I'm just trying to figure out how I can do anything to, survive.
See, my tolerance for squishiness is definitely very correlated with how punishing it is to die. Because if it doesn't cost me much to die, then I'm okay being super squishy.
Yeah, that's kind of huge too.
Yeah, this is totally reasonable, and this is why I usually just say, I got to level 95. I am done.
I will say, like, Last Epoch doesn't have the same problems that Path of Exile does with, like, halting your leveling process, but the whole if you fail you don't get loot really pisses
it's still
off.
not great.
Do you only have one life for each thing you're doing?
Yeah, you basically have
one
chance to complete this thing without dying in order to get the loot reward from doing it.
The problem is that you still have to finish the thing if you want to move past it on the map, and you have to do it and get no reward for it, which is
that's the part that feels miserable. It's like I now have to do this thing that I know I'm not going to get any loot for, just because I need to clear it out of the way so I can get to the thing on the other side.
To be fair, you can still get drops inside the map, but it's not that you don't get the completion awards, and it feels real bad.
Yeah, there's been several times that I've failed out on like a unique node, which I'm trying to chase for like inside their monolith system, which is kind of like maps. There are certain nodes that target specific slots. And that is one of the only ways that you can kind of target farm something is to farm a unique hat node, for example. And when you complete it, you're going to get a unique hat. It won't be the one you wanted, but you're going to get a unique hat.
It could be, but it won't be. But it could be.
Yeah, it's never going to be. But anyway, like when one of those fails, it feels so defeating. And then I often log out of the game and play something else.
I feel like this is you're answering why I've stopped going into the Wildwood, at least for right now.
Weirdly, I am doing way more Wildwood than I have done at any other point, mostly because I think I'm fine not leveling anymore.
Well, for me, it's more the stuff I won is from T16s.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I'm not fine not leveling. I'm still kind of pushing.
I'm fine not leveling until I manage to get up to like 50% of a bar, and I'm like, maybe I am going to level, and then I die like 6 times.
And then
I was playing it
feels bad again.
I was playing it real safe because I got 95 or 94 on my Lightning Arrow champion today, and I had just not cared at all for the longest time, and then I was just a few pips away from it, and I'm like, I'd really like to get that ding. So before the show, we were talking about Peglin, and it has more content.
Yeah, it's had some updates.
Peglin has updated a bunch. Like, there's unlockable characters now.
They've been unlockable characters for a while, but the last one, the Spinventor, is, I want to say, about a year old.
I think it might be even a little newer than that. And there's definitely been a lot of like balance tuning.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I really love the Spinventor. It rewards you for having a lot of different kinds of balls, and it also lets you play with slimes, which I just find really entertaining.
Yeah, there's just it had been a little while since I'd picked it up, and because I'd sort of checked out because I kind of saw everything that I felt like it had, but like they've added a bunch of new types of balls that you can get and new events, and I was able to unlock the Spinventor, but not the other one.
So
the one that took me the longest to unlock was the what is it, the Balladin.
Yeah, Balladin I don't have.
That one took me a long time. The Rogue took me much less time.
The Roundroll.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think they renamed that character though.
I don't know. But that one was faster, and I do like the sort of poison mechanics. They're pretty strong. But I just love the silliness of applying random slimes to all the pegs.
To like everything.
Mm-hmm. And I appreciate that since they've done a lot of the retuning, that the balls that you get and some of the relics, whatever they're called, that you can get are very specific to the different classes. Which is helpful, and it makes the whole playthrough feel very different.
Yeah, I really like a lot of the balancing that they've done. I again, when I played before, it really felt like bombs. Just go bombs and win. And
it's still a valid option.
It is,
especially if you're the Spinventor.
Yeah, like it's still a valid option. It's just not. It feels like it's one of several totally valid options.
Yes.
Versus like, oh, I'm probably not going to win if I didn't go hard into bombs.
I've also enjoyed throwing myself at the Crucible, which gets increasingly silly the higher you go.
It gets real silly.
And I think the highest I've hit was 9. And at that point, it becomes like some rogue likes, where you can tell very early in a run if you're going anywhere or not. But that's okay, because if I feel like taking a break and just being very chill, I can turn all of that nonsense off and just roll through the game. And it is equally satisfying, just in different ways.
The highest I've gotten with Crucible is up to 7, and that's only on the original Peglin. Not nearly that high on any of the other classes. Also, yeah, I thought the Roundroll, the Spinventor was a year old, but none of the classes are a year old. The first 2 came out in April, and the Spinventor came out in June.
Probably also, since some folks have played, there's some new bosses. They've sort of fleshed out the store system a little bit better. There's tons of new events.
They just added a new boss last week, so I haven't even seen that one yet. A new final boss, as it were.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet. I do enjoy the dragon.
The dragon has been run ending for me a number of times.
Yeah,
a lot more often than the Sapper boss is.
Yeah.
I'd actually not beaten the dragon until I was doing the poison build. They've got a hilarious name for it.
Spinfection is the current name for it.
Spinfection, yes. That dragon melted to Spinfection.
When it was first introduced, it was called Ballution.
I love that game.
They do love their puns.
They really, really do.
So, what's the thing about DDO giving away most of its content?
So, for anyone with any interest at all in Dungeons and Dragons Online, they just released a code that you can put into their store that gives you 4 dozen of the quest packs. Just
wow.
Yeah. And then 4 more are on sale for 99 points each, which is pocket change. So I've actually started the game back up and I'm playing it a little bit. I'm still not sure if I actually like Dungeons and Dragons Online or not. Again, this is a really old game. It's based on D&D 3.5, so
I love so many
based on D&D 3.5.
Yeah.
I love so many of the ideas.
Yes.
Yes.
Like I love the Dungeon
Accurate.
Master narration. That's great.
I remember this was a game that I was super hyped to get into the alpha test for, and then played it and wasn't sure if I liked it or not.
I really liked this for a while. I love DDO was a great game when I played it at launch.
I didn't play it at launch. I played it much, much, much later.
I played it at launch and much later and liked it both times.
Yeah, like it's enjoyable enough that I've, played a decent number of hours and like run the same dungeon 3 times each. Because, in theory I could give them, money and then only have to run it once, but I don't know. But yeah, and they've got a lot, when I played before, it was still basically only Sharn. And at this point they've added quest packs like in the Realms and Ravenloft, and like there's a Keep on the Borderlands quest pack, like all sorts of stuff. Isle of Dread, apparently. So yeah.
Is it still all in Eberron?
No, they switched to the default setting of
Forgotten Realms.
Some time ago.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting.
Starting a new character, you still start out on Korthos Island, which is Eberron associated. But yeah, like a lot. I think the majority of the quest packs are like non-Eberron. Like, and a lot of them are based on like classic mod. There's a White Plume Mountain quest pack. Like I was looking at the whole long list, seeing which ones actually like I recognize names up against the Slave Lords, Salt Marsh, Temple of Elemental Evil. It's another one of those. I feel like maybe I would like it more if I was playing it with people.
I always felt like it was a game that one of the reasons that I didn't get as hard into it as I feel like I wanted to is it was one of the last MMOs that was like hard. You need to be in a party all the time.
Right.
It's a lot more solo friendly than it was, but even so.
Yeah, but you miss so much because you just aren't going to have all of the tools.
You can't possibly have all the skills.
Yeah, in particular, if you're trying to build a character that can solo, you're probably not building a character that can reasonably find and disarm traps and pick locks and find secret doors and such, which means you do miss a lot of stuff. But yeah, so the coupon's good until February 11th, so you got about a month.
I'll have to look that up.
It's one of those things where I feel like if you think you might ever want to play D&D online, you should go ahead and grab this, because
might as well just have a bunch of content, because that's part of the cool stuff they've added since we played last.
Yeah,
I do feel like I'm going to be hard pressed to try and figure. Like I might have to go online and look up a build, because trying to figure out 3.5 at this point.
3.5 with weird micro levels and action combat, and it's not. It's not.
It's 3.5 based.
Okay.
Yes.
It was a lot more 3.5 when it launched. I'll say that.
Yes.
Yeah, there's like all sorts of just basically enhancement trees that I'm actually not sure how many you can have on a character. At least 4.
Does this mean that if I choose to play a fighter, I am not inherently making a mistake?
Fighter is a very good choice from what I can tell. I did a little bit of looking, and it seems like the consensus for a first character is either a 2-handed character using power attack, which could be either barbarian or paladin or fighter. And remember, multi-classing is a thing in this game, so you can
yes.
Or apparently Blightcaster is really good. I haven't looked into it very much.
I will say they must have done something if people are saying fighter is good, because fighter was a trap in 3.5.
I mean, in an action game, some of the things just do more.
Yeah, hit things hard and murder them in one hit before they can even touch you is very good in this game.
And it's action combat, so you're not being held back by action economy things.
I guess that's fair.
You do not have to stand still and make a full iterative attack in order to do anything.
And now we're going from former Turbine to Cryptic. Understanding Star Trek Online.
So I think I talked about Star Trek Online a little bit a few months back when I sort of hopped back into it and was messing around with it. And I kind of like fall into a hole of trying to figure out how that game actually works. And I found out that the reason that I felt so underpowered every time I tried to do anything was because I thought when I had originally started that game that I was going to be a science captain with a science ship. And that can be good, but it's also like the most complicated build in the game. And like one of the most difficult to build because your overall character is your character and your character's specific abilities, your bridge crew and your bridge crew's specific abilities, and your ship, which affects what bridge crew you can slot and which of their abilities you have access to, as well as all of the gear on your ship, which affects your abilities, which affects what other abilities you have. Like, they're called consoles, and they usually a lot of them grant either passive boosts or special stuff that your ship can do. And that's compounded by the fact that you can manage your power levels for weapons, engines, shields, and auxiliary, which is like everything else, your weird stuff, power level. And to give you a sense of how this comes together in a more sane build than the one that I have, there's a fairly straightforward build that a lot of people say is good for new players, which is basically, they call it a beam boat. And you basically pick a ship that has as many weapon slots as you can get. Just a big slow ship that's super tanky and has a bunch of beam slots on it. You select the beam weapon type that has a 270-degree firing arc, which means that if you put your side to any enemy, and your ship has weapons on the fore and aft, so that if you put your side to any enemy, you are pummeling them with a zillion beam weapons. You're just broadsiding them. And then your consoles are all stuff like increasing your maneuverability, so you can put your weapons to the side, to like, you can get your weapons aimed at the right places. And also, various things that like temporarily boost your beam weapon power, and bridge officers that are boosting your beam weapon power and maybe giving you some heals. Pretty straightforward stuff. The science build that I finally put together it uses torpedoes largely as an afterthought. The torpedoes exist and you do fire them, but mostly the weapons are cosmetic, because what I am doing is horrific science shit to people. Like, this will mean nothing if you're not like a old Star Trek movies, familiar with old Star Trek movies, but like one of the consoles that I have slotted on my ship is a Genesis seed.
Well,
yeah, like,
yeah, that sounds like a bad idea.
No, like that is the kind of thing I'm doing to people. It's not a good.
Are we the baddies, Tam?
Maybe. Like, I'm definitely tearing open space-time problems and like plasma storms and so forth. And now that I understand what science is good at, I can do terrible science to people. And what my build has coalesced into is one of my bridge officers knows how to use like the front deflector dish to rip open a black hole. So I rip open a black hole, I suck all of my enemies into it, and I drop like terrible AoEs on them until there's no more enemies.
I mean, once they're in a black hole, normally they would cease to be a problem at that point.
But who goes around cleaning up the black holes?
I've got a thing for that too, actually. I have another console. I have another console that'll seal that black hole to the severe detriment of anybody close by. It's a whole thing. But it means that I have like every so often I'll hop into one of the open group finder things, and there's a bunch of people who are like shooting a bunch of torpedoes or shooting a bunch of beams, like a sane person does. And then I press like 6 buttons, and the entire screen is filled up with nonsense. This was a build that took me legitimately several months to put together once I understood what I needed to do. It's actually kind of neat. Like, having gone through the most painful build that anybody says you can put together, it's actually made building other ones a lot more fun. Because I understand, they feel easier, and I understand the underlying thing. It's got a very Pokemon-esque thing going on, where there's a ton of ships in the game, and almost all of the like max level ships have a mini experience bar that when you get to the end of it, you get a ship trait that you can then slot on any ship you fly. So a big part of assembling your build is flying enough of these various different ships to farm up their traits so that you can then slot them into the actual ship you want to fly.
Got it.
And like, does it feel like Star Trek? No, it never really did. But it's still fun. It's neat to assemble like the ridiculous carrier ship, or like one of those like Klingon birds of prey that's like constantly cloaking and decloaking in battle in the most annoying possible ways. Like, these are all things you can do, and it's actually pretty fun. The other thing is they are obsessive about scale to a level that maybe they shouldn't be. It is not an experience that I picked up on the show, but the size difference between different ships in Star Trek is large.
Yes.
Like, I saw somebody flying the like original series Constitution class next to the next generation era Romulan Warbird. I did not realize that big stupid looking green ship is enormous.
Yeah, no, those things are huge.
It's stupidly gigantic. And this is like represented in game. Like, it just alters the way the camera is. But like, I fly around in a reasonably sized ship, and every so often I see this thing that's just absurdly huge. And, it's space, it's whatever. Like, it doesn't really affect very much, but it sure makes you feel small when somebody just huge is like, yeah, I'm going to fly my big boat around. What are you, a shuttlecraft? The one thing that I don't have is I don't have I forget what they call them, a guild. And there's a bunch of like character level unlocks that that are like locked behind being in a guild. So like I'm certainly powerful enough on my own for everything that I have tried to do. And I'm like slowly pushing the equivalent of like heroic and mythic tier content. But I can see that like little extra bit of power I could get. But yeah, it's kind of fun. I've been enjoying it. I like Sid Meier's Pirates. This is just that in space.
That's probably a show. Any final short topics?
PoE 2 is going to have pause in single player and kind of multiplayer.
All games should have pause. Not having pause is stupid. Looking at you, Dark Souls.
Yes.
Agreed. Anyways, I hope... I don't know if other ARPGs do this or don't do this, but all ARPGs should do this. Pausing is good.
Don't. It's dumb.
Hmm.
And I agree with you.
I haven't really played enough of it to say a lot about it, but I picked up Backpack Hero, and it's a very cute, like, roguelike where you organize items in a backpack, and you're a cute little pixel mouse.
Neat.
So far, it's pretty fun.
Inventory Tetris?
Yes. And all the things you have in your bag, A, can be sold for money when you get back to town, and B, are what you use to fight things in the dungeon. And it looks like there's also a rebuilding the town element to it as well. So
I'm on book 4 of the Dark Tower series, and I'm still not entirely certain what I think about it.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, that tracks.
It sure is a series that exists.
It certainly does. And now I feel committed to it. So like, I'm going to see it through, but...
See, at the point that I read book 4, that was the last book that existed. And actually, I haven't ever gotten around to reading book 5, and I really should at some point.
Book 4 sure is 3 times the size of the other books to that point.
I'm trying to remember how much of a gap there was between books 3 and 4, because I read the first 3 when I was in high school, and I still think it is a little strange that my middle school library had so much Stephen King in it, but whatever. I don't know if I needed to read Dolores Claiborne when I was 11, but I did.
Yeah, I was definitely talking with Belle about this the other day, and I'm pretty sure reading a lot of Stephen King as a pretty young kid was not good for me.
Yeah. But yeah, like I at that point, The Wasteland had just come out, and so I did read those 3 then, and then I read Wizarding Glass when it came out.
Wasteland is the one so far that I would say was a universally good book.
And now you understand that Blaine is a pain.
Blaine is a pain. And what a weird end of a book.
Yup.
Anyway. Well, hopefully you enjoyed the show, and we will see you again next week, I believe, for our Games of the Year show, part 1.
That's the goal, anyway.
Anyway, night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
See you.